Hey, I'm Dr. Paul Dyer. Welcome, Dr. Don Lewis. And we are going to be talking about education in schools and kids and people and thriving. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Don.
I have taught public school. I've also taught college and grad school, and have spent my whole life, no matter what I did, I really spent my life educating people. That was the underline of everything I did.
And that's
As,
a passion that we both have is about education and helping people live in life. And that's how we connected, actually.
right. Yeah, I even when my wife and I were CEOs and we did turnarounds in organizations. We went into conference centers that were bankrupt, and that was our first 20 years of marriage. And even then, we were educating people. You know, it was like, here's how organizations work. Here's how this occurs. Here's how that occurs. And here's where we are in the process, and so on. So it became an educational thing. So it wasn't just us as a boss saying, "Go do this." Everybody understood what we were doing. We got all kinds of input. We did dream sessions so it was all education. And then when we left the church ministry and went into public mental health, it was very much the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
We're both therapists. We're both certified sex therapists, and so much of what we did was educate. We didn't just tell somebody, "Well, you've got this problem." We'd say, "Well, let's talk about where you are, okay? Let's talk about the soil in which you were planted,
Right, right.
where you want to go." And
And how to
somebody
go
says,
from there.
yeah, and then we'd say, "Okay, so, here's we might say to them, okay, well, here's some information for you, a few things that you need to know, but now what do you want to do with it? How do you want to progress from here?" So that's kind of been the whole story of my life all the way along.
So, Don, we've talked, and we know that education is a way to help people understand something.
Right.
But I think something's missing even in education, whether it be from a low level to a higher level. What is some of those things that's being missed?
I think for me, part of it is I think there's several components. I worry about the cognitive things that are being missed,
Yeah.
the knowledge stuff. We're not talking about how to make decisions, how to gather data, how to know what is and is not true.
Mm-hmm.
When I was teaching philosophy in college, my students were just amazed that there was actually ways that you could look at some information and go, is this true or not true? How do you make an ethical decision? Well, one of the first things is you got to figure out you got to figure out the question, but then you got to figure out what are the facts.
Right, right.
Without the facts, how are you going to make a good ethical decision? And so I think there's that kind of thing. I think the second component of though is that I think we've also lost something in the connectedness of things.
What do you mean?
My mother taught school in a two-room schoolroom, and it was the whole community. She knew she had all the kids in one room or the other. I mean, there were two teachers, and all the kids in the community were in one of them. And there was a tied-in connection that way that we don't find in a classroom of 30 some odd people.
No.
And that begins to make a difference in how I think how kids are growing up. And I think it's in school, I think it's much harder. And then on top of that, and I'm a very strong supporter of the internet, and I'm very positive about what it can do. But like anything in the world, there's good and bad. There's pluses and negatives on it. And one of the negatives that I discovered as a CEO later on, as I was running a public mental health agency, is that I found that the young people, and by that time I'm talking about people that were 24, 25 years old as of 5 years ago.
Okay.
When I would send out a request and say, I'd send it out to whatever group of people I needed the information from at the agency and say, the state's requiring the following information on Friday. This is Monday. I need this back by Wednesday afternoon so we can work it Thursday and get it to the state. And I would list 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Here's 5 things. I need an answer to each of these things. My older people, I would either get the list with interspersed with the questions, or they would just give me a follow-up with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and the answers. The kids, I was lucky to get 2 answers out of them. and I'd send it back and go, hey,
I need all 5.
I need all 5. Yeah, give me all 5. And what was interesting was they would say, oh, well, I sent you the 2. Well, but this isn't, this isn't tweets. And I've hired you to be a supervisor. I'm assuming you can count to 5.
I need 5.
Yeah. So I think that's another factor that I think the internet is having that effect on people. And I think it's going to be something schools really have to begin to deal with, to teach them how to do serial sequencing, how to do thinking, and how to put it all together in some way that makes sense. It's simply knowing data doesn't mean anything.
Now, I don't think, I've been trying to work with schools in helping with the emotional intelligence, because I think the emotions are part of what kids are learning, will help them enhance the other part of the education that they would like to learn.
Right.
They don't seem to have the time, resources, or allow for an outside contractor to come in to help navigate that. Okay, so if schools are constricted in what they can and cannot do because of time constraints, maybe because of legalities or whatever board or whatever saying no or nay or whatever, then where can kids get this information as we know of now? And I personally don't know of any place that could help them understand cognitive development, because they're not going to seek it out.
No. And they're not going to know it's sort of like, how does somebody who's oblivious know that they're oblivious?
Right.
So how does somebody that doesn't have that ability or that knowledge know that they don't have it? I had a meeting with these people that I finally got fed up and had human resources pull a meeting with all these people that couldn't give me 5 answers. But instead, I told them, I said, now I'm going to start off a little negative because you guys suck at this. But I want to teach you how. And I went through it, and some people, one of them actually came up. Some of them were puzzled by it, but they got it and they did fine. One person actually came up to me and said, boy, that was just wonderful what you said. Is that something they taught you in grad school? And I wanted to say, no, actually, I kind of learned it somewhere around kindergarten. Kind of developed it from there. But I didn't get that sarcastic. But you understand, that's kind of what I want to say. And I don't know how they do that. I think there is some of that being done by things like Boys and Girls Clubs.
Correct. Yeah.
We have some martial arts academies near here that not only run summer camps, but they run post-school programs where the kids come and they'll do I don't know, half an hour, 45 minutes of martial arts, get the energy used up. But then they help them with homework. They have tutors there and so on. I think that's one of the things that would work. I think the other thing, there's an article that I would recommend to everybody to read. It's from, let me quote it here because I want to make sure I get you the right data. The Atlantic Daily, January 19th, 2017. And it's an article called How Iceland Got Teens to Say No to Drugs. And they went from these are remarkable statistics as to what they did, but they went from, very high percentages. Let's see. The percentage of 15 and 16-year-olds who have been drunk in the previous month went from 42% down to 5% in 2 years. And it went from use of cannabis from 17% down to 7%. Cigarette smoking dropped from 23% to 3%. And what they did was the government basically decided that it's cheaper to prevent than it is to fix or to arrest and put in jail.
Well, we know the United States only spends less than 3% on mental health?
Absolutely. Yes. So, and we not only don't spend good money on it, we have one of the worst delivery systems to give that 3%, to use that 3%.
Right. So we don't value human life, especially mental life.
Right. We do not. I taught for about 10 years. I helped set up and then for 10 years taught in program for law enforcement, corrections, and dispatchers called Crisis Intervention Team, CIT. It's a 40-hour program for teaching them how to deal with people in mental health or substance abuse crises. So the police officers, instead of coming in and having to arrest somebody straight out, they had some other alternatives. And we were clear with them. We said, we're not trying to turn you into a therapist.
No.
We just want you to have one more tool on your tool belt to talk people down rather than have to put them on the ground and handcuff them.
Or shoot them.
Or shoot them. And sometimes you may have to do that. That may not be an option, you know. And I sat in on a review board of a shooting of a mentally ill person, and there wasn't any options. You know, the police were forced to do what they had to do.
But here's,
we wanted options.
I'll interject one thing. If police officers learn more hand skills like martial artists do,
right,
they still would never have had to shoot them.
Yeah, this particular case was a guy with a high-powered rifle shooting at cars on an interstate.
Okay.
No there.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
You're right. Most of the time they would not. And what we found was that injuries to the mentally ill were dropped by about 20-some-odd%. Injuries to officers dropped by about 15% because they talked them out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I would sit there and say to them, you know, bottom line, I said, I know I'm older than most of you because I'm 70 now, and I was teaching when I was like 60 to 65, 68, something like that. And I said, I know I'm older than most of you, but even when I was young, I'd rather talk somebody out of a fight than have to fight them.
Right, right.
I mean, you know, the problem with the fight is you never know who's going to win till it's over.
and now we both lose. No matter who wins, we both lose.
Yes. There's a Chinese saying that I always quote with that when two tigers fight, one is killed and the other's maimed.
Yeah.
And to me, that's there was a great line on NCIS, and they asked Gibbs, the character, that they said, have you ever lost a fight? And he looked at him and said, I don't think I've ever won one.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever won one.
You know, and that's a really good answer. I think what I would say to you about that is that by being able to teach that kind of thing, they came back. I had officers call me and say, I'm doing a better job with my own children.
Yes.
You know, I'm doing a better job in my marriage because I now know how to listen and do a good response. I think that's entirely possible for us to teach in schools. I mean, do a similar program.
Yeah.
But the problem, again, like I live in Virginia, and Virginia's a good state in some ways, but bottom line, there's a lot of people that would rather get revenge and throw people in jail than prevent to begin with. And we have that problem all the time.
Now let's talk about thriving. We know there's a beginning, we know there's a middle, and there's a journey, and there's a transformation.
Right.
We're not going to get to all those different type of nuances here in this little talk.
Right.
The end part of thriving, it's very difficult for people to see the thrive when they don't have the drive. Right. So, but let's paint the picture of what thriving is, and then hopefully they can taste someone that says, well, maybe I want to learn more. I need to learn more. Right.
In mental health, we have peer support programs, and they're very, very, all the evidence on it shows that it's really excellent, that it works very well, because I can, as a therapist, say to somebody with schizophrenia, here's why you need to stay on your drugs. I know they cause you problems. I know you don't feel good on them, but here's why. But when the peer support person is there, they are a lot different. They can tell the person, they go, hey, you're full of crap. Right. You're not paying attention. Let me tell you about my life. Let me tell you what this did. And it's sort of the same thing you see a lot with like Alcoholics Anonymous or NA or something, except they're a little more trained than that. But I think there's a point of showing them, here's the end result. And over here is where you are. And here's some of the processes and the stages to get there. And for example, with substance abusers, we don't tell them that that relapse is a part of the process.
Right.
No, they relapse.
They relapse.
And then when they relapse, we say, okay, the goal is now don't relapse as often, relapse shorter, you know.
I know when I was working with drug addicts and addiction, I always talk about, I want to teach you how to heal, not recover.
Yes, right, exactly. And what I would say to a lot of them is, okay, right now we have you institutionalized in a hospital because we have to, because you're going to die if you try and get off this drug without medical support. We're probably going to take you for a month or 2 months into a program where we're going to really monitor you closely so that you can recover from all the physical damage that you've got and begin to get healthy. But then it's no longer, we don't want to keep you with recovery from that. Now we want you to start growing and begin to learn to deal with life and move on to where you can you don't have to think about recovery again. You think about thriving and living. Yes. And we say to them, if you think that's going to be perfect, get over it. It's going to suck sometimes. But because life always does sometimes. But you could live through it. You can go through it and come out the other side stronger and better.
And one of the things I know I said to the students, because I always call people students because I think we're all learning anyway, right?
Absolutely.
So I said, the benefit of you guys being in this program, whether it's court ordered, something, the best part about you being in this room, learning how to live, heal, and move on, is that you screwed up.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's tons of people out there, like we said earlier, that people don't know they're oblivious.
Yeah.
So they think they're healthy and they're not.
Right.
So they don't have an idea that they need to there's an opportunity to get better.
Right.
Here is an opportunity to say, whatever reason, doesn't matter what those reasons were, causes, or environmental blocks, whatever, you're here, let's go forward.
Right. Yeah, we always, as both in our spiritual direction and our counseling that my wife and I did, we always talk to them about, this is the soil in which you were planted.
Yeah.
Now, what do we need to fertilize, and how do you grow from here? We never went backwards for very long. We would go backwards if we needed to identify a cause of something. But then it's like, okay, now that we figured that out, turn it loose. We're not going to dwell there. That's not an excuse. I came out of a home where I didn't expect to live to be 18. And I had both emotional and physical abuse in the home. And I tell them that. And I say to them now, whatever age I was at the time, let's say 60, I say to them, okay, my parents have to take responsibility for screwing up my childhood.
Right.
But if I'm still screwed up at 60 and I'm a jerk at 60, it's my fault. Because I have to take responsibility for my adulthood. I can't blame my parents for that. I have to take responsibility.
What's 3 things that we can leave someone with before we get into the how to, but what's 3 things we can leave them with so that they can work on after listening to this? Is it identifying?
I think the first thing is you have to identify what your problem is.
Yeah.
You have to admit to it and say, okay, I tend to lie a lot, or I drink too much, or I don't want to do this, or I don't like doing this, or
I'm
whatever.
unhappy.
I'm unhappy. Yeah, I just don't like where I am. So I think there's an admission component to it, and a recognition of the problem. Then I think you have to outline, what do you need to do to get where you want to be? I don't believe in focusing on goals way out there, because that's too far out there. We got to talk about, what's the one thing I can do tomorrow that will get me one step closer to where I want to be.
So develop a purpose.
Develop a purpose, develop a plan, and keep it practical and real, And then last but not least, I think there's a sense in which you have to find, I talk about a hero's journey, and I tell them, write your obituary you would like.
Hmm.
And nobody has a good obituary that didn't overcome a lot of stuff.
That's true.
That's who we write about. Those are the heroes,
Mm-hmm.
and heroines of our stories. So how did you overcome it? Go to the end, to the very end of what would you like people to say about you? And then figure out what do you need to do to get to be that person?
So identify, develop a purpose,
Mm-hmm.
and write your ending story.
Write your ending story. And then you can move from there.
I'm working on a book, and I love to write as you love to write, because I think that's what we do. We love to write.
Yeah.
And I'm writing one of my books is about that ending journey. It's called Out of the Black and Into the Shadows.
Mm,
And
yeah.
and it's a take on being a young black boy and moving away from the stigmas of being just a black boy, black man, and into the shadows of the light of life.
Yes.
So
Yes.
yeah, so it's more of it. But I've been writing this almost like my own biography as I move along, because it's like I look back at what I wrote, and I'm like, man, what I did at 5, from 0 to 5 is one thing, from 6 to 11 was a different thing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I think one thing for us to realize is that even if you don't have, my wife came out of a good family, she didn't have major things to overcome, but her goal still is to become the best version of herself.
Yes.
So there were challenges she had to overcome to do that. She's a quiet individual, an introverted individual, but nobody who meets her in public would know that, because she said, okay, if I'm going to be a public speaker and change people, if I'm going to become a pastor and preach, if I'm going to do all of that, I've got to become comfortable with doing it. And I'll just have to learn to do it and go do it, no matter how much. So she had those challenges. I didn't have the challenge of being able to speak to people because I talk too much. I had to learn to shut up.
Well, Don, we're not going to take up too much of this time, but we're going to come back and we're going to get into the week of the how-to, because we know that people need not just the tools, but just because I have a shovel doesn't mean I know how to dig a hole. So,
right.
Otherwise, we would have a lot more holes just out there, and no one's putting plants in.
Exactly.
So, thanks, Tom, so much. It's been a blessing, and I really appreciate this, and I look forward to doing so much more.
That sounds great. And